Had to reach out and said, you know what, Sunshine, the executive director, would be great to speak with you. And I'm so glad that you obliged.
Absolutely, glad to be here. Looking forward to it.
Yeah. So, and like I told you coming in here, I'm actually, I feel privileged, but I'm kind of upset I haven't met you before now, because everybody that that mentions your name and that I tell them that we're going to have you on the show today speaks so highly of you. So, looking forward to our discussion today.
Absolutely, and it's vice versa. I've heard lots about you as well, so I'm glad to be here too.
I appreciate that. So, like I said, so Sunshine, Executive Director for Piedmont Housing Alliance, and I wanted to, as I do with a lot of the groups that come on here, kind of start off in layman's terms, so to speak, because for us to be such a small community, we have a lot of things going on. We have a lot of resources.
Mm-hmm.
So folks hear about FAR, they hear about CHRA, they even hear about AHIP. So there's so many moving pieces to when it comes to what housing looks like and representation thereof looks like in Charlottesville. So I would like to get your definition, so folks know like where we're coming from today when it comes to where does PHA fit in this puzzle.
So our region is actually pretty unique in that we have, some of the organizations you just mentioned. We each we're like puzzle pieces coming together into one big picture. So the role that Piedmont Housing plays, we've been around for a little over 40 years, and we provide affordable rental housing for close to 700 families throughout the region, not just Charlottesville City, but also in Admiral County and some in Nelson County too. That's a big part of the work we do, and we are actually growing that number on a year-by-year basis. So, we'll probably end up talking about Friendship Court and Kindlewood here a little bit. But as that goes through the redevelopment process, that's going to increase the number of affordable units in the city core. But we have a number of other projects we're working on too, because we know that fundamentally the number of homes that people can afford in this community is not enough.
Right.
We got to grow it hard, fast, and big. So that's part of what we do. We also provide financial counseling and financial coaching. And home ownership coaching for aspiring first-time home buyers and in particular low-income residents. And we administer down payment assistance to assist those folks trying to get across the finish line to get into a new home, and everything in between.
Awesome. So, man, so there's so many different directions that we can go there.
Yeah.
With all the great info. So thank you for that. The big news, let's kind of start with the big news, maybe we'll drill down from there.
Sure.
So a lot of people saw in the news, and congratulations for the grant that the PHA was able to be a part of. So when people see millions, like that coming into the community, the antennae pop up.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
So give us a little background on that grant, like how did you all get involved with that, and sort of the purpose for either wanting to, is it something that you applied to, or was it something that was granted, from the state level as far as recognizing the organization? Give us a little background.
Yeah, no one gives money without applying for it these days. But fundamentally, if we're looking at the market as a whole, we know that whether you're trying to be a homeowner, you're trying to just find a rental apartment in the market in general, most people can't afford it. And fundamentally, the only way we can make it work and make it affordable for folks is with subsidy investment. And that's public subsidy through federal, state, and local funding, philanthropic, all kinds of things. So the funds that you're talking about were applications to the state for a combination of sources: National Housing Trust Fund, State Housing Trust Fund, and a couple of others. And they have application cycles twice a year. And those sources are a part of what we need to do, because by the time we get done with any affordable housing rental project, there are probably 15 layers of funding involved to make that kind of project work. And so what we got from the state was a good portion of that, but we got a whole lot longer to go.
Gotcha. And so with that, when you talk about what affordable housing looks like, what are some of the goals and the ways that you and your board and your team are looking at would suit Charlottesville best? Like to now have this sort of influx and monetary resource available. Like what's some like your main goal, sort of like a top of agenda to really tackle this issue that we're facing in Charlottesville?
the way I look at it, and some people may have heard me use this phrase before, but I like to look at it as all kinds of housing for all kinds of people in all kinds of places. And that fundamentally people want to have choice. They want to have choice about where they live, what the kind of style of building they live in, what school system they're in, whether they're in the city or the county. And we want to be in a position to be able to provide people choice. And that requires investment across the board to make it affordable for folks. And what affordable means, I hear that question a lot. Like, what does affordable mean? And it's a range. Different, what's affordable for one family isn't affordable for another, and back and forth, right? And so the way the government defines it, and the way we have to operate, because we get government funding, is that ideally no household should be spending more than 30% of their income towards their housing costs, which is either rent or mortgage plus utilities. So that's how we look through things. And our goal is to build housing for folks who make 60% of the area median income. Again, that's a kind of a formal phrase, but that's the way we got to operate because that's what the funding sources tell us to do. So we try to make it affordable for folks making it 60%, 50%, and 30% of the area median income. And so what that translates to in real dollars, so, for, say, a 2-bedroom for a household at 30% of the area median income, I'm going to say AMI, that's the shorthand for it.
Right.
That might mean that's a family who maybe is making $30,000 a year, $35,000 a year in that case. And so for that family, they can't really afford more than $8,000 to $10,000 in annual housing costs. That's about a third of their income. And so when you translate that into rent and in utilities, that means that a 2-bedroom might be somewhere in the range of $500 to $600 a month. That's the ideal. That's what those families can afford. And so we try to build as many of those as we can. And then we have units homes that we're setting aside for folks at 50% of the area median income. So maybe that's not, $500 a month. Maybe that's closer to $800 or $900 a month. But all those, in order to maintain those rents, we got to have that subsidy at the front end, which is the reason we got that money, because it helps us bring the money in during construction, so we have less debt on the property, so we can make sure that the rents stay low, throughout the life of the property.
Right. Okay. Gotcha.
And it gets complicated, but
oh yeah. It absolutely does. But speaking of which, in what ways does PHA actually work with the other organizations, or even and not just housing, but other local groups to try to make the most of the funding and just make the most of the initiatives?
Yeah.
To kind of simplify things a little bit.
Yeah, pretty much every project we have under works right now is in some way a partnership with other organizations or neighborhoods. So obviously at Friendship Court, and it recently renamed to Kindlewood, that community, we're working in partnership with the residents there in the community. We have a group of residents who we've been working with for the last 7 years who are elected by their neighbors to represent them through this process. To co-design the future of that neighborhood. So that's really our main stakeholders, the existing residents there in Kindlewood. But you look at another project like we're in the early stages of right now on 501 Cherry Avenue. That's a partnership between the Fightfield Neighborhood Association and Woodard Properties and ourselves. And in particular, Fightfield Neighborhood Association, that leadership has taken a really strong stand around wanting to see affordable investment in their community, affordable commercial investment and affordable housing investment. And so in this partnership, we're saying we're accountable to them, the neighborhood as a whole. And Woodard Properties is partnering with us because they own the site, and we're going to try to come together and build a really, I think, incredible project on the old IGA site. And so there's some real amazing work that's happening there right now too.
Yeah. And there's a lot of community partners as part of that, with the Fightville initiative,
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, we are speaking with the executive director of Piedmont Housing Alliance, none other than Sunshine Mathan.
Mathan, that's close enough. It's all good.
Mathan. Yep. Wow. So let's see. So the affordability, Sunshine. I understand like the AMI.
Yeah.
But Charlottesville is very peculiar. And I'm curious on how creative, that you may have the room to be, and even with your team, like when it comes to how we approach the issue. Because Charlottesville is one of those places, as I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir, of you have very, very inflated salaries and wages that then bring up with like what would be determined to be the median. Right? Quote, unquote,
You're right. You're right.
So I'm curious, are there any, is there any initiatives yet, or you have any ideas on how we can approach it to really look at what it means to be low income in Charlottesville?
That's a complicated question. So, the question of affordability, you look at it from two different lenses. One is, trying to make it build housing that's as affordable as possible, right? The other end of the spectrum is kind of what you're talking about, which is how do you just raise incomes so people can start to afford what's out there in the first place? And you're right. Charlottesville is a very, that area median income that I mentioned is a distorted figure. Because if you look, I've been in Charlottesville about 6 years now. When I first came to Charlottesville, the AMI, that area median income, was around $80,000 a year. So what that meant is that half the families made less, and this is not individuals, this is families. So in some cases it might be two-person households. For half the households are making less than $80,000, half the households are making more than $80,000. But now, 6 years later, that number is $123,000. Huge jump. And that's not necessarily because everyone saw that jump. We know that for sure. But what it does say, most likely, is that the families who are struggling to afford to live in Charlottesville in the first place are moving out because they can't afford to live here anymore. And the new people who are moving in are those higher income households. So you're seeing this sort of distortion of that median income. So fundamentally, we have to be looking at all the work that we do through the lens of not only providing affordable housing, but providing pathways for economic mobility and moving up as well. And so part of the work that we're doing around that is, at Kindlewood in particular, for the last couple of years, we established a Financial Opportunity Center, which brings together our financial coaching team, eviction prevention team, down payment assistance, housing counseling, trying to get all those folks into one space so that someone would have a one-stop shop to go to. We've been using the old United Way building on Market Street for the last couple of years, and once phase 2 of Kindlewood gets finished, we're going to actually relocate that space, in the heart of Charlottesville, downtown, right in the heart of Friendship Court, Kindlewood. Right. And so and we're also going to be, bringing together Network to Work and other partner agencies under one roof. Yeah. And then the other part of Kindlewood, as an example, is we'll start construction in early next year on a new high quality early learning center. Okay. On site as well, and so that's going to do.
Will it just be for residents, or
it'll prioritize residents, but it'll be broader than that. Okay. But the most focus, the deepest focus, will be on the residents there, but it's also a workforce development initiative because there are a lot of folks who taking care of kids is what they do all day long anyway, and we're trying to create a pathway for moving into that as a kind of a professional field and upward economic mobility from that perspective. Absolutely. So we'll be creating jobs through that early learning center, providing space for people to be able to walk to the early learning center where they go. But the other key piece here, this is the long game, which is we know that investing in education, investing in our kids, particularly in that preschool age, sets them up for success. The data shows that if you start kindergarten and you're behind where your peers are, it is hard to catch up. So we want to be sure that the residents of Kindlewood are, when they enter Clark Elementary, that they're ready to go and that they have a clear trajectory forward. And so that it's not, the early learning center is not just about a place for kids to bounce around, but it's a true educational context to get them ready to learn.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Thank you for that. Let me sort of pause right there to clarify for the listeners as well. What neighborhoods is PHA responsible for? Because as I understand it, different housing groups are responsible for different communities, neighborhoods. Is that accurate? How would you say that?
Yeah, so our organizational footprint is actually the entire Charlottesville city plus Albemarle County, plus actually 4 other counties around us as well. So we provide services in some way for all of those regions. Okay. Now, in the outer counties, we don't necessarily own properties out there, so we're really providing down payment assistance and financial counseling services, those sorts of things. Mm-hmm. But in Charlottesville City, we are always looking and in the urban ring around Albemarle, always looking for opportunities to grow the footprint. Going back to the wanting to make sure that people have choices to live wherever they want, whatever school system they want, like school they want to live next to, where their jobs are next to, they want to be close to that. So we have, as we look at developing more in the Fifield neighborhood, because that's a partnership that we have emerging. We're also looking in the north downtown area. We have a project that the old where Maco is on Park Street. So we're actually have that site under contract. We're actually going to redevelop the Maca site as affordable housing and a new early learning center there as well. And so that'll be a neighborhood where right now there's no affordable housing. All that is just high-end market rate housing. So part of the idea of giving people choice is giving people opportunity to live in areas where they have historically been excluded from living. And we want to provide that opportunity north, south, east, west.
Awesome. So you mentioned education and resources. To me, I'm anticipating hearing your perspective on this, but when it comes to education and resources to folks who are who have a multitude of reasons of why they may feel forced to move or why they have to move, whether it's cost of living, can't afford the taxes, or what have you. Like that seems to be a very, very specific educational need right now. So I'm kind of curious on your take on that, and maybe some resources that you can even share with some listeners when it comes to the person who may be face to face with the developer, so to speak, and saying, look, I'll give you X amount of dollars, I'll just take property for you, but they want to stay in the neighborhood, they want to maintain their neighborhood. But some folks really don't have the financial literacy. So I'm curious about some of the financial literacy types of education that's provided.
Yeah, that's an important question. So right now, the financial coaches that we have at our Financial Opportunity Center, they work with folks in a range of situations. It could be somebody who is in a rental home or rental apartment and is facing eviction because they can't afford to pay that month or the last couple of months. We have a staff and resources to help people try to stay in those homes. So that's one end of the spectrum. We have folks who can be there, like if somebody owns their home now but is struggling to pay the taxes or struggling to pay the mortgage. We have folks can help coach them through that process. And there are actually some resources, if you look in the city of Charlottesville, that the city provides to help cover taxes and particular tax increases for low-income households and in particular seniors. So there are some resources out there, but it is trying to get the guidance to figure out how to navigate those. So our housing counseling team can be a resource in that regard as well.
Gotcha. And when it comes to the development piece, like what I would even say advocacy. When it comes to PHA, because you've built relationships, with so many communities, so many citizens. But one thing that I'm being vocal about right now, and I'm sure it doesn't come, it's not a surprise to most people here that's familiar with the area. It's like we're sort of landlocked, like when it comes to city proper, and there's really nowhere new to build.
That's right.
So when developers come in, and in many ways PHA is an advocate for citizens, like sort of what role do you feel that you play in that? And I'm interested in your take on when it comes to Charlottesville developing, quote unquote. Some people may even call it gentrifying, if you will. But we're also trying to build, fluency and literacy, home ownership, or like pride in your neighborhood and community. And so how does PHA come face to face with the development?
We all come face to face with that. And I'm gonna say outright that there is no easy, simple answer in this. It is a tough situation where no matter what choices we look at, there's always trade-offs, right? And so the landlocked part that you talked about. So Charlottesville City is going to stay the size it is and will not change. There's a state level agreement around that. It's not going to happen. And the county itself, even though there's an urban ring around it, they themselves want to maintain 95% rural. So we are kind of stuck with the land area we got. And we know we have continued to grow over time, and we will continue to do that. Those are all facts. There's nothing we can do about those things. But in that context, so what that means, if we're gonna, we have a couple of choices as a community. One is we could say, okay, no more building. That's an extreme version, but like you can say no more building, But what that means is the kind of change you're going to see is the just continued inflation and increase in cost of housing.
Right.
And so what that results is the displacement, the gentrification that you talked about. That's one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is, well, maybe we say, come build whatever you want, and meaning that we build up. There are some infill spots where there are relatively low density, and you can build up. The flip side, the trade-off there is that you end up building taller, larger buildings, more dense. You increase traffic. All those things are impacts on your community. If you live in that community, sometimes those impacts don't feel welcome.
Right.
And so, but if we don't welcome it, the opposite, then we get the opposite situation, which is we get displacement and increased costs. So there is this fundamental trade-off, and so it's not A or B. It's got to be somewhere in the middle, right? We got to find the middle point that's going to allow for more development, but in a way that is responsive to community concerns. But part of this goes back to the education piece. If we're not clear about what those trade-offs are when we talk about these things, it is easy to just put your hand up and say, no, I don't want it here, you build over there. But then the neighborhood over there says, no, I don't want to build it here, you build it over there.
Right.
And we get this situation where we get landlocked and deadlocked.
Yeah.
So there does have to be growth. I mean, there is going to be growth. We have to build to meet it, and if we don't, we're screwed.
What about the resource? I'm sorry. I just want to interject there about the resource that may be provided to a citizen of one of your neighborhoods that may say, "Well, look, like I don't mind. Like I'll leave. Like I'll go to Louisa, wherever." But they may not have the know-how. Maybe first time like homeowner, or they may need help finding the right apartment, whatever the case is. Like, what are the resources around that?
So we do have part of that Financial Opportunity Center is actually a housing navigator as well. Matthew Murphy, I don't know if you know him. Yeah. So he and a couple others work together to try to help folks get through. From their most of the folks he's working with are folks who are at risk of eviction or are sort of in really pretty dire circumstances. So he's trying to help them, stay housed and find a new place to be. But he can also help navigate, if you're making a choice for yourself and you actually do want to move to, further out because for whatever reason, he can be part of that solution for you as well.
Okay.
But I will say that, it's important, like if some developer comes to you, and this is, let me step back for a second. So one of the things we got going on right now in the city that you may or may not, your listeners may or may not have heard of, is we're talking about a rezoning of the whole city. And what that means is this question that I was just talking about: how much density, how much could a site get? How many homes could be built on a certain site? What parts of the city get more homes versus others? All those conversations are happening right now. And probably before the end of the year, the city council is going to vote on a final solution, and it will mean change. That is fundamental. The question is, what does that change look like, and how does it affect different neighborhoods? So I would recommend getting engaged and listening to those and participating in those conversations. And importantly, one of the things that the city is doing is deciding to what's called upzone all parts of the city, at least to some extent. And what that means is that those neighborhoods that have historically been pretty exclusionary, just a single home on a single site, and particularly when you're talking about larger sites where there's a lot of land owned by one household and one house, every site is now going to move, is going to be allowed to have maybe 2, maybe 3, and in some cases maybe more homes to allow for that sort of neighborhood scale density inside of the city. So that's important. That's an important step, and there have been cities across the country that have been doing that over the last few years. But the opportunity that sets up, both good and bad, one opportunity is that those neighbors, those folks who own homes in historically black and lower income neighborhoods, the risk is that developers who are unscrupulous might come to them and say, well, we'll give you $300,000, we'll give you $500,000 for your home, because they know what they can do with the site. But the homeowner doesn't necessarily. Right. And so maybe that site is, the developer's offering more than the homeowner thinks they can get. Right. But in reality, it's actually worth another couple $100,000 more. At least. So that you got to be careful. If somebody comes to your door and just cold calls you, do your homework. Talk to your neighbors. Come to the Financial Opportunity Center. Help us. Let us help you figure out, is that really the right price? If you want to leave, that is your choice. If you want to sell, there's nothing. We're not going to get in the way of that. But we want to make sure you're as informed as you can be, so you can make the best choice for you and your family.
Yeah, wow, that's spot on. And Financial Center is located where again?
So it's on High Street. Financial Opportunity Center.
Financial Opportunity Center. That is, that's big. That's big. So have you all discussed like the mixed use scenarios or like the co-op development? Because as you mentioned, other cities, there's also other cities to where they take into account the community that they're developing and they don't just look at sort of the bottom line of like profitability of what I'm building here. It's like I have to put in consideration on how this benefits the current community. And PHA being one who has obviously built solid relationships within the neighborhoods. I'm curious if you have any take on that on maybe like even your wildest dreams of what that could look like if when the city thinks about zoning and when developers think about like new businesses or luxury condos, like what that could realistically look like to include history and community and culture.
That's important and that's hard.
Yeah. I know you all just had a workshop, so.
Yeah, so I will say, we, I'll use the example of the 501 Cherry Avenue site in particular because, back to the, starting where you started, the mixed use development. So that's actually going to be a combination of, affordable residential and affordable commercial spaces on the ground floor. So that is mixed use, commercial and residential. And those ground floor uses are going to be, twice as nice, which is a senior-focused center. They provide a lot of funding. They're not a nonprofit, but they provide a lot of funding for senior services, in the region as a whole. So they'll have a secondhand store there, and then Music Resource Center, which provides a lot of really fantastic youth programs for kids trying to engage with music. Both of those will be located there on site permanently because they're going to actually own their own spaces. That's the goal. And then, probably many folks have heard, everyone knows that the old IGA was there, Estes IGA was there for, a long, long time, and it closed down a few years ago. Part of the idea, the hope, is to bring back a neighborhood scale grocery that is, affordable to the neighbors within the region, including the folks who are going to be living there once the affordable housing is built. And trying to get all those uses onto a single site requires 1, creativity, 2, city investment, and 3, a partnership. It's a partnership with the neighborhood, and they set that vision forth when they did their small area plan. They created a vision that allowed developers like Woodard Properties to come in and then actually pull us in when the neighborhood says, "Look, we'll support your project when you go in for rezoning, but only if you are going to meet what we're trying to get at in our small area plan, which is those commercial uses which provide services to our neighborhood. And we know we need affordable housing because Fifeville is facing gentrification pressures just like 10th and Page and other neighborhoods too. Right. And so if you can do those things, we'll go in and support you in the rezoning." So that agreement, and we have a memorandum of understanding, an MOU, that we actually signed 3-way between Woodard Properties, ourselves, and the neighborhood association, and that document holds us all accountable to each other. And it is as far as I know, it is the first time that we've done that. Anyone in the city has done that kind of agreement. Yeah. And I think awesome. The small area plan set the stage for that. That allowed us to have that conversation in a really constructive way. And I think, I've heard from city councilors and planning commissioners and other folks in the neighborhood and in the region as a whole that this actually is going to hopefully be a model for how, development gets looked at, into other neighborhoods too, not just Fifeville, but in other areas. Yeah.
I would definitely hope so. I think a lot of our listeners would hope so as well, because that's seem to be, a point of contingency when it comes to what developers are capitalists. They're going to make money. Sure. You can't tell them, what to do with their profits and whatnot. But I don't know. Maybe I still think that the heart of man is good. Maybe I'm just a dreamer. But I feel like that MOU that you just mentioned seems like something that the city would adopt. That housing associations would adopt to say, hey, this is our city. When you come in, this is how we play ball. You know, but just so many times, and I'm sure you've been faced with it, of folks even think that it's impossible to even fathom, like that you can tell a developer, like what to do in your community.
Right.
But we are joined by Sunshine MATHON. He is the executive director of the Piedmont Housing Alliance. And I'm pretty sure y'all been enjoying this conversation. A lot of good information. I'm also thinking, as the leader of PHR, what's your vision for affordable housing in Charlottesville? Because I've heard some of the things, some of the history and even things that are on the table. But most people want a legacy as well. And even if it's not a personal one, like it could be, like for your committee, for your board, for folks to say during that time frame, man, PHA really did us justice.
I mean, fundamentally, I want to feel like when the time that I'm here doing this work, that we're accountable to the community and doing the work that the community needs fundamentally. And what honestly, one of the reasons that the board hired me, I came from Austin, Texas, where I had been working before coming here to Charlottesville 6 years ago. And when the board hired me to come, it's because I had the experience and expertise in doing, lots of affordable housing development, and in bringing the sort of the financial architecture is the way I tend to look at it. Even though, like, I'm an architect in terms of my degree, in terms of how I look at buildings and design them, but I also look at this work as financial architecture because it's very complex and very hard to bring together. So having that expertise there in Texas, bringing it here to Charlottesville, the idea is to not just look at Friendship Court / Kindlewood and the redevelopment there, because that's an incredibly complex, financially complex and planning complex property to work through in partnership with the residents. But we need to grow. We need to meet the demand. And we know, you probably have seen, the report that came out, I can't even believe it's now like 4 or 5 years ago, the housing needs assessment that the city did. And what it identified is that we need, 3,300 new homes, effectively, to meet the demand, to make sure that people can afford where they live and aren't paying more than they should be. And that's just the city. That's not Multnomah County and anywhere else. That's just the city. And that was 4 or 5 years ago. And part of that, the 3,300 number was the redevelopment of Friendship Court and Kindlewood. Part of that was actually redevelopment of public housing because they were old and needed to be replaced. But we need these new homes as well. And so the only way we get there is by using every tool possible to make that happen. And so that includes partnering with developers like we're doing on the 501 Cherry site. That includes we're partnering with Habitat to build another 121 affordable rental units in the Southwood project, just south of the city in Albemarle County. Well, actually, that'll start construction in December probably. And we have a whole bunch of other properties in our pipeline as well. And I use the word pipeline because that's the way that we tend to think about it. And each project, 4 or 5 years of planning to go from idea to opening those doors. So when you talk about legacy, you talk about like the work that needs to happen. It is a long range planning process because you got to build your capacity as an organization. You've got to pull in the relationships and the resources to make all this happen. Right. And so right now, I actually did an evaluation of where we are between now and 2029. So that's like another 6 years or so. And we have over 1,000 homes in our pipeline right now as we're hoping to build. Now that's not all that 3,300, but that goes a long way. And if we're doing that in partnership with CRHA doing their redevelopment, and Habitat continuing to do their work, and some of the additional partnerships like we weren't anticipating with Woodard, we start to make a real dent.
Yeah, absolutely. I got to ask, how do you have those how do you approach those conversations with folks as well? Like, because you made a comment earlier, which I'm on board with, but times like now I'm finding it hard to verbalize and communicate it. Like when it comes to that statement of development is going to happen. and sort of crossing that line of folks understanding like I don't mean any disrespect. Like I want you to stay in your neighborhood too, but we also got to figure out what that looks like while this development happens.
That's a really important point. We live in a country where our economic system and and in particular the way real estate is valued and the way real estate transactions happen, it is fundamentally a transactional process, and it is designed for the investor. Some of us as homeowners or renters, we try to live inside the system, but fundamentally the way our system is designed to benefit investors. And we can deploy every tool we got. We can try to rezone. We can bring in investment and philanthropic dollars and state money and try to build affordable housing. But every day we're still confronted by the fact that we have no control, and the city has no control around how the real estate market happens. It is federal policy. It is beyond our control. So back to your point, when somebody has a piece of land, they have rights that no one can infringe on. City, state, federal government, ourselves. And so they have a choice about what they feel like is the most important, the things they want to prioritize. And it's easy in our world to prioritize money as the end game as opposed to community. And I personally, where we are best situated as a community is when you have a community coming together. And when I say community, yes, all of Charlottesville, but I'm talking neighborhood by neighborhood.
Right.
When you have neighborhoods coming together to set a vision for what they want to see, it's not going to necessarily mean that what happens is exactly going to follow that vision, but that vision allows the city, allows decision makers, and frankly, and for developers who have a heart as well, allows them to look and see what the community wants, what the neighborhood wants, and then try to meet that. It won't be perfect. I think we'll do the best we can, but it is. We got a reality we got to contend with. Development is going to happen. We can't tell people not to move here. That doesn't work.
Right.
Everyone wants a choice about where they live, and that's every city in the country is facing growth demands that they have a hard time meeting.
Yeah.
And all we can do is figure out how we're going to try to welcome that growth and contain it in a way that doesn't displace those most vulnerable in the community.
Yeah. That's very well said, and you said the word choice. I feel like that's where the humanity lies, right? It's like people want to know that I have a choice, and I'm enabled, and I have the opportunity to make a choice.
That's right.
Not just pushed.
That's right.
And definitely not pushed into worse, living situations and circumstances.
Yep.
Right, absolutely. Well, we have been joined by the Executive Director of Piedmont Housing Alliance, Sunshine MATHON, and it's definitely a privilege to sit down and talk to you. Please don't make this the last time.
I'm loving it. I'm loving it.
And we have a lot of connections here as well. So when you need to get word out, please use this as a sounding board. Not only the show, but if we can share, information online or what have you.
Fantastic.
Please let me know. And before you go, I want to make sure that you make it very clear because the abundance of resources is needed now more than ever. So when it comes to contacting you and your team, what's the best ways of reaching you all?
So the financial opportunities, you can go to our website, which is piedmonthousingalliance.org, and you'll see resources on there. There'll be contact information on there. I'll even put my personal cell on the line here too, because if you have ideas or want to connect, I want to connect you with our team in the way that's appropriate. So my cell number is 512-217-0429. Text me, call me, let me know, and I'll try to connect you as best I can.
That's awesome. Readily available. So, Sunshine, I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you for being on I Am At Your Talk Show.
All right, I appreciate it, Charles.
Yeah, so family. Stay tuned. So much more show you that you don't want to miss. So tell a friend. You know how to reach us. I Am At Your Talk Show online. Local listener area 101.3, 101 Jams. 101 Jams, Charlottesville's #1 for R&B, hip hop, and classics. All right, y'all. Be right back. I Am At Your Talk Show.